Welcome to Surrender School.
This is the Essential Enneagram Empowered 12-Step Workshop. This is session 1. Today we're going to talk about Enneagram types and mantras a little bit further than we have in the past. All right, so once again, I want to cover the goal. The goal is a personal journey. It is not intended to teach you the Enneagram, but inevitably you'll pick stuff up, obviously. And then, but the goal is to help you recognize the wonderful person that you are so that you can relax into your true self, where the God of your understanding, higher power, greater power, whatever you call that entity, resides, or at least touches you. How we're going to do that, we're going to recognize the unseen forces that drive our behaviors. Okay, those are the passions or defects, and the fixations, which basically are the stories we tell ourselves. And the way we're going to do that also is we're going to catch ourselves in the act, those times that ego causes us to act out our persistent defects, which all of us have, and then to gently remind ourselves that we're human so that we can return to our beautiful, true, shining self. Okay, a couple of reminders real quick. Some things to keep in mind. I am not an expert on anything. It's really funny. When I was young, I was an expert on a lot of things, but I now know I'm an expert on nothing. So I'm not an expert. So just realize that I'm learning. And as I learn, the best way for me to learn is I teach. And so that I've always figured that out a long time ago. So if I want to learn something really deeply, I just plan to teach it, and then I do. Okay, recovery is a process, not an event, and this is just part of the process. And once again, the goal is spiritual growth. And the reason I say that is the goal, and the reason this ties to this class, is because what I found for me is that self-contempt stopped spiritual growth for me. It's as if my higher power said, you can choose, right? You can hate yourself or you can grow spiritually, but you can't do both at the same time. You choose. And I'm choosing spiritual growth. All right. I'll keep homework to a minimum because I don't want you to take a whole bunch of time, but there'll be a challenge every week. And if you only have time to do one thing, do the challenge, because the challenge really does challenge your Enneagram type, which I love. I'm asking you to focus on your own Enneagram type for now. Inevitably, you will also like, oh, that's my husband. Oh, that's my sister. That's my child. That's my son, right? And that's fine. That's inevitable because we're human. But I want you to focus on your own, which brings up something else. So as you're going through any of the stuff that we're going through, if it isn't resonating, right? If it's like, oh, yeah, I guess, then you're probably not typed correctly from the test. I mean, that's inevitable too. A couple of other things, because you have been through the 12 steps and you have, we talked about last week, that cracking of the shell. Sometimes in order to recognize your type, it's almost like you've got to go back before program. You look before program and say, what did I act like then? Where were the defects of character that caused my suffering? Where were those? What were those? And that's almost when what will happen is you'll go, oh, I mean, 8s are obvious, so it works out well that an 8 is teaching this because 8s are extremely obvious. So my examples are obvious, but the other ones are more subtle just because they're more subtle people, right? Just in general. So anyway, but the thing to keep in mind is watch for that. And especially today, this is my very favorite session of all the sessions that I teach so far. This is my favorite. And you'll see why here in a little while. But anyway, I'll probably say that like 20 more times at all the other sessions too. But for right now, this is my favorite. Okay. All right. We are going to do some shares here. And I think so. I'm going to stop sharing. Let me real quick do a quick review here. There were 2, in essence, assignments. One was just like the reading thing, watch the science of step 1 or the step 1 science. And then there were the actual challenges. And I would love people to share on the challenges because they're going to get harder every week. And I'd love to hear if you felt challenged by them or it was easy or whatever. But we're going to do 2-minute shares for just a few minutes. Step 1 is admitted we were powerless over food, in my case food, that our lives had become unmanageable. So a couple of things I want to talk about. First is I nowadays say admitted we were powerless over reality. I am powerless. And I started saying that when I took the emotional sobriety class that Linda T held on Ellen Berger's book. Ugh, that book blew me away. And so I am powerless over reality. And what that says to me is reality doesn't give a shit about my opinion at all, at all. And I used to think I had to be in control, not even just have an opinion, be in control. And then notice that there's a dash that our lives had become unmanageable. So another thing that I learned is that when my life became unmanageable, because it happens, like flat tires, people sick, that kind of stuff, that is when I had to completely admit my powerlessness, because I tend to want to take control. It's the 8-way, right? So, and you act out on whatever else that you would act, however it is that your ego structure acts out. Okay, I want to give a little background here, and because I'm talking about, for right now, a little bit that I've learned over time. So I worked in the workforce about 50 years, and for about 30 of that, I worked in software. Part of the time, I traveled the world and taught software sales, but for the rest of the time, I was usually in charge of a group that worked with customers on whatever software it was whatever company I was working for. And customers would come to us and say, this does not work. Well, it might not have worked the way they wanted it to work, but it actually is working as designed. It might be a shit design, I don't know, but it's working as designed. I wouldn't say that to the customer. I'd probably be a little more graceful. But anyway, so what I learned in life as well is my body is working as designed. And I absolutely, this came home to me once again when I took the class, Step 1 Science. Linda T covered that. It's on the Surrender School website. If you had a chance to watch at least part of that session 4, or the session 4, that whole thing, and I have to admit, because anger is very accessible to me, as she covered that, it really pissed me off, because I always wanted to just believe that somehow I'm broken. No, my body works as designed. I ingest this food, the gut hormones all kick in, the brain hormones all kick in, and guess what? I'm now acting out my addiction. My body is working as designed. I am not broken. I've been in program 20 years, and for the vast majority of that time, I believe myself to be broken. It's the weirdest thing. And it may serve you to believe that you're broken. That's fine. It did not serve me. That's where the self-contempt came from, right? But I'm like, no, this is working as designed, which again, I get a choice. Do I choose to ingest this? Then all the shit's going to happen in my system. And then I'm going to have to fight that. Or I can not ingest it. And guess what? Working as designed. It doesn't trigger any of the stuff, right? It's like Laurie C. in the book that he wrote, or the workshop thing that he wrote. He just, we have two things: stop and stop from starting. If you can stop from starting, you never have to stop again. And I've known this years, but here, I guess, but not in my heart and soul. Okay, let's do some quick definitions here. Once again, we've covered passions. Those are, think defects. Whenever we say passions, virtue is the gift of the spirit. And I want to take just a second on the gift of the spirit again. What this is the gift from your higher power, the reward that you get when you are in your true self. When you are living in your true self, you get the gift of the spirit. And so, and to me, right, to be able to look at that gift of the spirit, and for the 8, it's a gift of spirit innocence, which sounds like what? But it's basically to be able to look at things through fresh, new eyes. You see things differently than you ever had before. That's such a gift. It's such a wonderful, wonderful gift of the spirit. Okay. Well, new definition is fixation, and the fixations are the story that our ego tells us that makes our passions or defects acceptable, right? I'm going to give an example of 8. I think I probably had this example last time. Somebody says something to me. This is before, right? Says something to me, it pisses me off, and I get in their face. Okay. So they say something to me, it pisses me off, right? That's that emotion that happens. The passion, then that defect is I get right in their face. And then I tell myself, of course you did that. You had every right to do that. They should never have done. That's the fixation. That's the story that our ego tells us that makes our passions acceptable. It makes that defect acceptable to us. Once we've cracked that shell, like we've done, that's why we go, oh, that's not acceptable. No, I can't act like that. Right. I can't even think like that. Especially anger is fatal to us, right? So it's like, okay. All right. We talked about growth happening. I'm going to give you a minute. If you haven't already put your number in front, you'll want to do that, because we have some sharing later, I think. Most of you did that. So go ahead and make sure that you do that if you would. All right. We're going to go into the book, and I won't spend much time here because there wasn't, I mean, some cool, really cool things in there. But on page 11, this is the only one I'm actually going to read. People who are driven by pride of self unconsciously blind themselves to their liabilities. The problem is to help them discover the chink in the walls their ego have built through which the light of reason can shine. So the reason that I picked that is because it's like this goes right along. The Enneagram and the 12 steps work right along, right? This is that wall that we've built up, right? So it works right along. Okay, the next one is the whole page of page 12. And basically that just, I think her point is kind of, look, it's like the Enneagram goes right along with, right? Which I think is very cool. So if you haven't had a chance to read 12, you do want to do that. But the one that I really want to point out is near the bottom where it says, we have all 9 personality types in us, but develop our ego around inhabiting one particular type. You don't choose this. This is that reaction that the baby has, and it starts building that wall. And that is the type that you that you are wired to be. And it's the one that basically causes the vast majority of our suffering. I mean, it really does. Okay. And then on page 14, on page 14, I'm not going to cover this, but these are some typical questions that people who are, I'll use the word suspicious, it's a bad word, but are suspicious of the Enneagram. What is this thing and why does it do whatever? Is like, these are like some typical questions. The one I only want to really talk about is a lot of people will take like a Myers-Briggs, or curious people always take the test to say, what am I like, whatever. So the Myers-Briggs and DISC and all of those are basically looking at how you show up in the world. How do you present yourself to the world? The Enneagram is deeper than that. It basically says, how are you wired? Because how you show up may not be how you're wired, right? And so to me, as an 8, for me to realize, because one other thing that happens with 8s, and those of you I've run into some 8s actually came to the office hours. Very often, I am what is called a 1-to-1 or a sexual 8. And I'll be in a room and suddenly people are looking at me like to take the lead. They don't even know me. And they look to me and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Right. And so, and what I realize is, because I used to say, am I just like a takeover kind of person? And I guess there are times I'm like that, but other times I'm not. And what I realized is I'm wired this way. And so I could be very compassionate with the way I showed up in the world because of the way I'm wired. And once I could relax about that, right? And I've said this before, right? My ego believed that I needed to try to be strong and courageous. But in reality, once I relaxed that and once I could dissipate that ego structure, at least a little bit, then I realized I don't have to try to be strong and courageous. I am strong and courageous. I am wired exactly like this, right? And I don't have to imitate. I don't have to imitate that ego structure, because who I really am can shine through. And I really love that. Okay. And then the next thing is on page 18. There is a paragraph where she talks, basically, this is from Nathaniel Branden. And it is where I really solidified that idea that self-contempt or self-hatred kills spiritual growth, right? The man who repudiates himself he has no base from which to move. It's hard to move. If you hate yourself or you feel contempt for yourself or you say these horrible things to yourself, it is almost impossible to grow. Or it's like you're, going through quicksand to try to grow spiritually. So the real point of this whole thing is to get to the point where you love yourself. If you can feel compassion and love yourself, what happens is it spills over and you feel compassion and love for other people as well. And that's really, when it's all said and done, the point of this entire workshop. Okay. I'm going to introduce some new titles for you. This is what makes this session 1 my very favorite session, at least so far, because I just absolutely love this. This is what I want you to do. I want you to come with an open mind and an open heart. I just want you to relax into it, and I want you to listen as I introduce the new titles for each of the types. By the way, everything I have came from, I am a voracious reader. I read a lot and I love the Enneagram, so I read a lot about the Enneagram. So this has come from different books and different workshops that I've been to. This particular one comes from a book called The Alchemy of the Enneagram in Transforming Addiction. It's for professionals, which I am not a professional counselor, but it was very helpful to me. So anyway, I want everybody to just kind of relax and enjoy this. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to cover the new titles. All right. So first of all, the one is a merciful teacher. So if you're a one, settle into that. I want to say too, last week, what I introduced you to are the typical titles, right? The one was a perfectionist, and which is not at your worst, but not at your best, right? It's just like almost what you were really were before recovery, and now you're working through it. This is what you are at your true self. So the one is a merciful teacher. The type 2 is an intuitive healer. The type 3 is an inspiring champion. The type 4 is a creative alchemist. The type 5 is a kind wizard. The type 6 is a courageous pathfinder. The type 7 is a joyful visionary. The type 8 is a lion-hearted protector. And the type 9 is a gentle mystic. Now, as your type was read, right, I want you, and I'm going to go into each of these a little bit more detail. I want to just see, does it make you buoyant to think? And once again, when I went over this with the group of, there's a handful of people that I individually, right, walk through things. And when I introduced these titles, it's like they were like, some of them teared up, some of them were just like, oh my, that's wonderful, right? Because it's, yes, at my best, I am that, right? That means you are typed correctly, if that's what you felt. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not typed correctly if you didn't feel it, but let yourself feel those things. Okay, type 1. So last week we learned type 1 was called a perfectionist. Their passion was anger, usually itself and usually repressed. And their virtue was serenity, being serene in all circumstances. Once again, mantra is, it's not always my responsibility. The new information that I'm bringing, the new name, and this is what they'll be called the rest of the workshop, is the merciful teacher. They are striving to feel perfect. They're striving to feel perfect by avoiding criticism, avoiding rule breaking, avoiding illogical behavior. So if you are a 1, right, you strive to feel perfect. That's how you want to feel, is perfect. And then you do that by avoiding criticism, rule breaking, and illogical behavior. Okay, let's go on to type 2. Type 2, once again, last week we learned that they're the helper. That's not a bad word, helper. That's nice, I guess, right? Okay. There is pride in pride in their giving. The hook for the 2 is it's really hard for the 2 to feel thanked, right? They do all the stuff for other people and never quite feel thanked. They never quite feel loved, okay? And once again, their virtue, the gift of the spirit is humility. Now let's introduce the new information. So the 2 is the intuitive healer, and they are striving to feel connected. And the way that they do that is by avoiding their own needs, avoiding being alone, and avoiding not being needed. So they want to feel connected, and they do that, right? They avoid their own needs, they avoid being alone, and they avoid not being needed. And once again, their mantra, that opposite, is ask for what you need and ask again, for the best love comes from the full well. All right, type 3. We learned last week that they were the achiever. Their passion is self-deceit. Their virtue is self-honesty. And let's see what we learn now. Okay, the 3 is the inspiring champion. If you are a 3, at my best, I am an inspiring champion. If you are a 3, right? They like to feel outstanding. And they do that by avoiding failure, avoiding emotions, and avoiding inefficiency. And notice that avoiding emotions, that their mantra ties to that. To get to truth, I must be informed by my feelings, and they avoid feelings. Okay, let's go on to 4. The 4, last week, we learned that they are the individualists. Their passion is envy, meaning that it's really interesting because like they're envious of, but it's a general envy. It's not like, I want this and that person can't have it. It's not like that. I don't think 4s are like that at all, but they're highly emotional, and they wish their life were better, different, that they suffered less, like that. And then the gift of the spirit is equanimity, that we all we are all human, right? Okay. And the new information on the type 4 is they are the creative alchemists. 4s are usually very, very creative, right? They are striving to feel unique. And the way they do that is by avoiding insignificance, avoiding conforming, and avoiding small talk. And sometimes they can turn small talk into big talk, right? And they'll do that. They make it more important than maybe it would be in the world. Okay, so they like to feel unique. They avoid insignificance. They avoid conforming, and they avoid small talk. All right, let's move on to 5. The 5 is the observer. Their passion is greed, usually greed for knowledge. They amass knowledge. And their virtue is non-attachment. The gift of the spirit is non-attachment. And notice because they're non-attached and they love to observe, making contact with direct experience and feelings will bring greater knowing. So if you want more knowledge, right, feelings will bring greater knowledge. Okay, now they are called the kind wizard. They like to feel sufficient, and they do that by avoiding emotional reactions, avoiding crowds, and avoiding not knowing the answer, right? So they want to feel sufficient. They avoid emotional reactions, they avoid crowds, and they avoid not knowing the answer. I'm married to a 5, so this rings so true, I think, at least for my husband. Okay, type 6. I just love that little bunny. Okay, last week we learned that they're the loyalist. Their passion is fear of almost everything. And then their gift of the spirit is courage, right? And I want to talk real quick. Their new title is the Courageous Pathfinder. If you are a 6, that should lift your heart. At your best, you are a courageous pathfinder. 6s like to feel secure. They avoid being told what to do. They avoid not being prepared. So the people that prepare like crazy often are 6s, and they avoid self-doubt. Okay, let's go on to 7. The 7 last week we learned is the adventurer. Their passion or their defect is gluttony. And once again, it isn't necessarily food. It's just more, right? Their virtue is sobriety, which means not having the need for more, basically. And then I love their mantra, focus and staying present, because they jump around a lot, right? Focus and staying present are my holy work. I am enough. I also just love this picture. Okay, that's the new stuff for the 7. The new stuff, they are called the joyful visionary. Isn't that awesome? The joyful visionary. They are striving to feel satisfied, and they do that by avoiding negative emotions, avoiding rules, and avoiding lack of options. So they want to feel satisfied. They avoid negative emotions. They avoid rules. They avoid lack of options. They really like to have a lot of options. And of course, their mantra is staying present. Okay, let's go on to the 8. The 8 last week was called the challenger, right? Which when I talk about getting in people's faces, yeah, okay, challenger never avoids conflict. And matter of fact, other people always thought I sought conflict. I don't seek conflict, never did. But I'm up for it if it needs to be, if I viewed it needed to be done. When I was younger, I viewed it needed to be done a lot more than I do now. Okay. There's a lust for intensity. We learned about that. In my vulnerability lies my strength. And this week, the 8 is the lion-hearted protector. I like that. I like that a lot. The lion-hearted protector. They like to feel powerful. How do they do that? By avoiding indirectness, avoiding waiting, and avoiding being controlled. Yeah, don't like to be controlled. Do not like to. I'm like the worst waiter in the. I used to actually be a server, right? A waitress, and I was fine with that because that was my job. But oh man, just like sitting around waiting, ugh, I'm really bad at that. And then even now, and then avoiding indirectness. Okay, so that's the 8, and then let's hit the 9 here. 9 is known as the peacemaker. Their passion is sloth, which just means putting things off, delaying decisions, delaying work, delaying things like that, right? And then their virtue is right action, taking right action at the right time. And then what we're learning about the sloth now is they like to feel at peace. And they do that by avoiding directness, by avoiding conflict, and by avoiding making a decision, right? So some of the shares today that talked about this, right? It's, yeah, pick up the phone and make the phone call telling somebody you're not going to be there, like a direct like that, right? And what if they came back and said something and then there's conflict, and right? So absolutely avoiding directness, avoiding conflict, and avoiding making a decision. And then their mantra ties exactly to the opposite, right? Resolve small things before they become big things. All right. So now what I want to do, I hope everybody enjoyed that. I just love the new names. I just absolutely love them. That to me, that, lion-hearted protector, right? Just jazzed me. Okay. We admitted we were powerless over, I'll say food, because most of the people in here are, that's our compulsion, that our lives have become unmanageable. And I want to talk for just a minute over why is step one difficult for my type? And by the way, I want to let you know, when I put something like this up, now that you know your type, you will automatically look at your type. I expect you to do that. Just like you looked at the picture, right? I mean, because we are driven, this is all about like self-exploration, right? It makes sense. Okay, but I'm going to cover these so that everybody understands, and I think you'll find them to be true. Okay, so what made type one, and once again, what made it difficult to admit I was powerless over, right? In my case, I'm saying now reality, but that our lives have become unmanageable. Okay, one, I need to keep the perfect illusion going. And that might sound mean, but there is no such thing in this world as perfection. Everything changes all the time, unless you consider change perfection, right? So that illusion of perfection is what I need to keep it going. Hard to do if I'm admitting that I'm powerless over food, right? That's hard. Okay. The two, I seek myself, and I mean my sense of self. So if I were two, I seek my sense of self in others to be loved. How could someone so giving be an addict? That's what makes it hard for the two. For the three, I seek my sense of self, myself in others to be admired. Isn't being successful proof that I am not an addict? Okay, for the four, my need to feel intense emotion prevents me from seeing my powerlessness. Or if I see it, I become melancholy, right? Four is really, can often. I think the counters on each of these aren't, but in general, fours can be very melancholy and they feel emotions very intensely. Okay, for the five, knowledge is power. If I know enough, I am never powerless, right? If I know enough, I'm not powerless. That basically is, that gets in the way of recovery. Okay, for the six, my inability to trust prevents surrender. I don't even trust, for a six, I don't even trust people. I'm going to trust this unknown, unseeing thing. Does that, so for sixes, doesn't your mantra make sense? Doesn't that mantra make sense against this? I mean, and once again, it's not perfect mirror images, but oh my gosh, right? So I want to encourage you again, learn your mantra, say it all the time. Keep it in mind, because it's going to help soften and dissipate that ego structure. Okay, seven, feels like surrender limits my options and it might not be fun. So sevens like to have fun, sevens like to have options. And it feels like that might surrender my options, or might limit my options. Okay. And for the eight, surrender implies that I'm not in charge. And if not me, who is? If I'm not in charge, who is in charge? Who's in charge here? Right? That, hard. So hard. And maybe it's hard for everybody. Oh my God. Really hard for the eight. Okay. And for the nine, surrender equals stepping into life. I'd rather be numb and comfortable. I'd rather sit on the couch, eat popcorn, and watch a movie, right? Or get on Netflix. Okay. I would love for you to journal on this if you have chance or time. When has it shown up in your life? And if it hasn't shown up, you might be mistyped. Not necessarily, because once again, on each type also has a counter type, and you'll understand this later. When the instinct kind of is in the opposite direction, it's almost like it's different. So I'm not saying you are mistyped, because you may just be in that type, but you're a counter type. Okay, and it happens with every one of those. Okay, which sounds complex. Sorry, but I'll cover that later. All right, time to talk about the weekly wrap up challenge. And once again, I'm imagining that the hour on Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning, 8 a.m. Pacific time, that those will become a chance the first week or so, it's about, am I really this type and all that, right? From then on, I'm imagining that it's a chance for people to come in and share about their challenge. Did they do any of the challenges? And were, because some of them I'll have 2 or 3 that you can choose from. How did it work, right? How did it go? So let's go ahead and talk about this. I'm going to cover these as well. And we're doing time-wise. We're okay. Okay. So once again, we know that the type 1 usually seeks to feel perfect. They want to feel perfect. So here is what I'm asking you to do this week. Seek criticism. Usually ones do not, right? Seek criticism, but you want to do that. I want you to break a rule. Don't get arrested or anything, but break a rule and do something completely illogical. All right. So one of those 3s. You want to do one of those 3 things. Okay. For the 2, you usually seek to feel connected. So do one of these this week. Take care of a need for yourself that you've been ignoring. Spend at least an hour completely alone and not distracted. Don't have your phone, don't need, just alone and not distracted, not thinking about other people. Spend, an hour. Okay. Say no to someone that you believe may need help. The 2 is you should feel like what? You should feel that right now if you're a 2. Okay. For a type 3, you usually like to feel outstanding, so do one of these. Try something you're pretty sure that you will fail at. Be alone for an hour and feel sad and cry about a past event. Let yourself cry. Or do a task that is usually easy with your non-dominant hand. No knives, please. Nothing that's dangerous. Okay. Let's look at, hold on a second. Let me do 4. Type 4, you usually like to feel unique, so do one of these this week. Spend time somewhere, like in nature, that makes you feel small. When you stand before the ocean, you go into the mountains, right? Like that makes you feel small. Blend in with the crowd or talk with someone about the weather or some other small talk. Discipline yourself to do that. Should be really hard. Okay. Type 5, you usually like to feel sufficient, so do one of these this week. Emotionally react to a sad animal movie like Old Yeller or Ring of Bright Water. Give yourself permission to cry if you feel like it. It's my husband never cries, but we watched Ring of Bright Water and he teared up, which was awesome. That's why it's in here, because 5s don't like to do that in general. Okay. But try it, see if that works for you. Spend an hour in a crowd and feel like part of the crowd, not just observing, because remember, they're the observer. Really get into a sporting or a movie. Let yourself really get into it. You may even have to force yourself to do that, but see if you can do that. And then also ask an expert about a topic that you know nothing about, and be curious, but don't feel the need to research, because it's really nice to be married to somebody that researches like crazy, because I always know I always learn so much more about a topic than I would personally research. So that's good. Okay. Type 6, you usually like to feel secure, so do one of these this week. Follow someone else's instructions. Have someone else give you instructions and follow those. Do something that you have not prepared for at all. And then allow yourself to feel that you may not be enough. You may not, right? And journal on that. Allow yourself to feel that, oh my gosh, I may not be enough, right? That's a challenge for a 6. That's the reason there's all this fear, right? Because they're afraid in the end, they're not going to be enough. So allow yourself to do that. That's a tough one. Okay, the type 7, you usually like to feel satisfied. So do one of these this week. Decide to feel angry, judgmental, or some negative emotion about a character in a movie, not a person, just a character in a movie, and journal about that. All right, 7, this is tough. Stand in line at a grocery store, stand in the longest line, and do not switch to another line. Stand in that line and just stay in that line. Really hard for a 7. Okay, type 7, make a 7-item to-do list and go down it item by item until they're all done. Don't jump around. The 7 that I talked to said, oh, I make the list in the order that I'm going to do them, right? Which may be some weird random order, right? And then they jump around it. Okay, so that's the 7. For the type 8, you usually like to feel powerful. So do one of these this week. Ask for something by dropping hints rather than asking directly. Everyone I ever shared that with, because I'm an 8, laughed out loud when they tried to picture me hinting around at something. Right? It's like, oh my God, I don't even think I could do it. Okay. Stand in line at a grocery store, stand in the longest line. Don't switch to a shorter line. No yelling at anyone. That's of the 8. And then in a safe place with no obstacles to trip over, let someone blindfold you and lead you around. Okay. I need to say one of the toughest things, I had knee replacement surgery, and my husband took care of me, and it was so hard for me to just relinquish control like that. And I love him. We've been married 43 years, right? I trust him more than anyone in my life, but it was still really hard for me to I had to relinquish control. I couldn't even walk, but yeah, it was really hard. Okay. Type 9. You usually like to feel at peace, so do one of these this week. My niece, that's a 9, laughed out loud when I told her this one. Okay. Order a very specific meal at a restaurant. And I mean, like, okay, I want a medium rare hamburger. I want it turned over at about 2 minutes, like that. I mean, like a complete, I'll use the terminology Karen. I mean, I want it to be like the most specific, the kind that you can tell that the server is like going, oh my God, right? I want that. So order a very specific meal at a restaurant. Be direct and unapologetic. Just like go crazy with it. I can't wait to hear about that. Okay. Play against someone and force yourself to be competitive. Some 9s are competitive, but force yourself to be competitive. Make a decision you've been putting off. No contracts, please, but make a decision that you've been putting off. All right. Don't forget the office hours, Tuesday and Wednesday, 8 a.m. Pacific. Same meeting number as this. Last week we had 12, and I think this week, I can't wait to hear more shares, especially about the challenges. All right. Let me give the assignment, and then we'll open for sharing. We have a half an hour more for sharing. Okay. So before the next session, memorize your mantra. Please do that. Do the step 1 challenge, which I just read. And then there's a couple of things I want you to read in chapter 2, page 21, and then page 24 through 25, because it describes passions and virtues better, again, deeper. And then read the info about your own type. If you read the whole thing, and there are people that said they've read the whole book, and it's like, whoa, okay, that's a lot of information. If you read it on your own type, if you focus on your own type, starts on page 27, you can really focus on that. If you read all the types, it's like a blur of information. Just going through this workshop, you will learn the other types. Inevitably, you will. So focus, when you're reading this, focus on your own type as opposed to reading all of it, unless you are the type that have to read it all. There are that type. Okay, time for questions and sharings. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you for recovering with Surrender School.